Welcome, everybody. This is our third Fusion Forum. I'm Martha Carter, the director of the Twisted Outreach Project for Back Care and Scoliosis, and we are based in British Columbia, Canada. However, we're a nonprofit that has a website, and we work with people all over the world. And today, for this third forum, we are gathering to share stories about what it's truly like to live with a long spinal fusion for scoliosis. Stories that rarely make it into medical literature, stories that we generally don't really hear unless we're talking to each other. And yet we know that our fusions do shape our lives. And it's important to have a chance to not just talk about them, but also to exchange ideas for making it through this difficult condition. And so, as many of you know, there are millions of people around the world living with spinal fusion from scoliosis corrective surgery. And yet, despite these numbers, there's surprisingly little medical follow up. And we know that there's very few specialists who understand how to support us when complications arise, and they almost always do. So we also know that spinal fusion can be incredibly helpful and even life-changing, life-saving as it straightens curves and twists and relieves pressure off the heart and the lungs. But many of these surgeries are performed during the teenage years, and so even though they can offer correction and stability, or it seems so at first, there can be a wide range of challenges and complications that show up later, especially for someone who has it really young and then they're living it with this fusion their whole life. So sometimes this leads to the need for more operations. And this is what brings us to the theme today of revision surgery. So we're honored to have three speakers with us today who will share their astonishing and inspiring stories of navigating more than one spinal surgery. And we know that their experiences, even though they're not easy to hear, they they are exactly why this forum exists. We need to bring into the open the many challenges that fusioneers face and reinforce how you have to advocate for yourself, especially in systems where you may not always be understood or where there isn't a specialist, or you go back to find your doctor years later and they are no longer working. So we need to learn how to fight for ourselves. And even though we might get a lot of help from the surgery at first or even forever, and we know that surgeons can be excellent at their job, they just don't live inside fused bodies. They don't know what we feel. An x-ray might look fine. The fusion might appear solid. The hardware might look perfect. Yet the patient, us, we know when we need some help. We know when there's something wrong. We know that we cannot live with it the way it is. And sometimes we have to persist and push to really be listened to. So part of our work here is learning that it's okay, if not essential, to trust your own experience, to persist, to seek out practitioners who listen, who have experience themselves, like some of us out there now who are working with fused people, and we're fused ourselves, so we do have that understanding. We need people who are going to listen to our lived reality, to respect what we're telling them, and we obviously want to help each other to find solutions. So these are the stories you'll hear today, stories of persistence, resilience, and I'm grateful that we all get to witness this together. So thank you again for being here. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Sarah Evans, who's visiting here from, or online here from the UK today. And so I'm going to do my little spotlight switch here. And welcome, Sarah. Thanks so much for being willing to share with us.
Hello. Hi, Martha. Yeah, thank you so much for asking me to share my story. It's been so helpful. And yeah, hello. I recognize a few other people here from a past couple forums I've been to. But yeah, my name's Sarah. I'm 40 years old from the UK, the south, just south of London. And I'm currently a stay-at-home mum to a 1-year-old boy. And I'm also qualified physiotherapist and sports and myofascial massage therapist. So I'm hoping to get back working again at some point. when I've rehabbed myself enough, because my surgical revision story is about having to have my rods taken out, basically, which I never thought was ever going to happen when they were first put in when I was 16. It's like kind of a horror story, really, to me. Like when I was young, I thought, oh no. But anyway, yeah, I'll start from the beginning. So yeah, I was 16 and I actually self-diagnosed my scoliosis. No one else noticed it, including my parents and dance teachers, gymnastics teachers. I had no pain, and I couldn't even feel it was growing. I just saw my ribs looked funny in the mirror. And yeah, it had already, when I went to see a doctor on X-ray, it already grown to 55 degrees thoracic and 20-degree lumbar curve. Um, so yeah, I was like, like what's happened like to my body? I didn't know this was here. And in the UK, we have the free NHS health system. But I was under private family health insurance. So I was like fast tracked to a private surgeon by my parents. And he basically told me you could, your heart and lungs could be squashed within like 6 months, even like, as worst case scenario if you don't have this surgery ASAP. So it was just so quick for me. I literally had the surgery 5 months after being diagnosed. And they put two titanium rods in only my thoracic spine, like from T1 to T12, because it was the lumbar curve was only a compensatory one. So that one did actually correct a little bit as well, just by doing the top half. And yeah, they fused five vertebrae in two surgeries. Um, and yeah, it basically it all went well to start with. I was a success story. I healed really quick and yeah, went back to normal life and just sort of forgot about it like a bit, like just tried to fit in with everyone else. And yeah, it was only so it kind of basically changed the course of my life having this surgery. So the main problem was that I only got pain when I was like sitting still. So I was like quite pain free, to start with. But I had to change like my career path because I couldn't sit still, and academic studying was what I was doing best at, or I thought I was best at. So, and also my surgeon told me he'd operated on a professional ballerina and she'd gone back to dancing professionally. So, like, my other option was doing dancing as a career, which was obviously a bit like a lot more risky. But I just thought, why the heck not? Let's just go for it. What have I got to lose? I've been through this crazy surgery, I'm gonna fight this and like learn more about my body. And so I got in to do a musical theatre dance degree. I did full-time training. And yeah, I was okay with the fusion, like literally doing ballet every morning, loads of different dance styles, singing, acting. I would have been like a success story, for the surgeons at that point, like with what, some of the things I hear them saying nowadays that people can do with the surgeries. But I think for my case, it maybe wasn't the wisest option. My fusion was in 2001, I had it. So it had like six screws. So it was like a little bit, not as like maybe you can't get as much mobility as the more modern surgeries. And yeah, basically I had like a bad ankle sprain and tore a ligament, and then like because it's like really demanding a professional dance career, I had like pain in my ribs during a really hard West End sort of like, high demanding performance. So basically what happened on a job 6 years after I had my fusion, I just woke up in pain, chronic pain, like where my rods were. And at the same time, my calves locked up and they went into a spasm. So I think it could have been linked with the ankle like infection and injury from the past. So I have heard sometimes fusions, if you've had other injuries in other joints, like it could affect the structure, but we don't really know. Could have just happened anyway. I was about 22 then when that happened. So. yeah, so this is like I had to give up my dance career and everything just crashed in my life. I was chronically depressed, chronically anxious, and I eventually got chronic fatigue, probably about another like 6 years later or something. So things just slowly declined with my health overall. And I decided to basically retrain and help myself again as a physiotherapist and sports and remedial massage therapist. So at this point, I did discover lots of things that seemed to be helping to start with the pain, and I become very hopeful that I was gonna get myself better, you know. Like myofascial massage, somatics, infrared sauna, herbal remedies, like there's, loads of things I tried. And another thing I found really interesting on my physio course was I got to do lung function tests on myself. And it actually, like, my lung capacity was so restricted. It was like a third of what it should be for my age and size. And I kind of thought like that's strange because I was told the surgery was supposed to stop my lungs being squashed and reducing their capacity. But, probably because of all the scar tissue and the way it's fused, it was just very restricted anyway. But anyway, yeah, at this point, I was just like, so if I was trying things helping and then it was just getting worse and the pain was just there, like literally constantly all the time. I had to just lie down for ages to try and get rid of it. So I was going to doctors, of course, like throughout this like 14 years of pain I had. I was going to doctors regularly and they just, all they would do was an x-ray and tell me, oh, the rods are not broken. So there's nothing we can do. Um, and I was a bit like, I couldn't really afford like to pay for an MRI scan. I didn't have health insurance at this point because in England, you have the free NHS health service and people don't, your insurance would be through the roof, like with the surgery I've had to even get that. So I was kind of just literally fobbed off by the health system again and again and again. And I kept going to my GP, it's like an elephant in the room, like it's getting worse where the rods are constantly. I kept getting pushed away. It's all in my head, apparently. And yeah, I got a bit desperate at one point and even was like deep into meditation and um, just trying anything possible basically to help myself. Anyway, like trying to get to the crux of the story. So it happened during the start of lockdown and the COVID pandemic. Like I just suddenly got really ill and had spasms and like up and down my spine, like, and I was getting tingling down my left arm. Just in the middle of the night, this started, and I basically found out a few months later that I had a tooth infection. And I like because I could feel this like something spreading to my back and spasming. And they finally did an MRI scan and they found I had like a bulging disc above and below the rods and arthritis. So this was like after 20 years that they've been in. So but the main problem was this infection had spread to my metalwork, which was really hard to diagnose. So it was during COVID. So I kept going to A&E feeling like I was dying, and they kept sending me home, even though the infection markers were like rise, but they weren't risen too much. So they like kept sending me home. And so what it was like a biofilm infection, like that can get stuck. It's quite common. They can get stuck in implants, weak tissues that lack blood flow. Like it can be really bad scars or metalwork. And yeah, it was just so hard to diagnose. Like it took 2 years and 12 courses of antibiotics and me not getting better before any what surgeon would do anything to save my life, basically. I went to see four different surgeons, two of them private because the NHS ones weren't doing anything. And the two private ones, I couldn't even pay them to take the rods out. Man, I was asking, I was saying I need the rods out. I can feel that they're killing me. They've been causing pain for so long. And they just didn't really listen to me. They didn't really believe me. They said the scan. So the thing about a biofilm infection is it doesn't show on MRI scans. So it's really hard. The only way you can fully diagnose it is by a biopsy, apparently, but they wouldn't do a biopsy because that's invasive. So I think they were just hoping I would get better with the antibiotics, but I never did. So I finally got referred to a surgeon who worked at a specialist hospital for infection in metalwork. And he basically agreed to take them out finally. And so it was all just like, oh my God, like I just need to say the right things to like get my life saved here, you know? Um, and yeah, so it he took the rods were taken out in 2022, so 3.5 years ago now. I felt a lot better. It did save my life. I was right the whole time with what I was saying, and all my pain went away as well. Like as soon as they come out, like it was like all the pain was just gone, like in stiffness. Obviously, I still get some pain now. Like I still have a bit of a curve, and you know, if I overdo it, like I still have a slight bulging disc above and below. But the arthritis actually is gone now on an MRI scan as well. But yeah, it's just been amazing having the rods out for me because they just I don't know why they caused so much pain for so long, but maybe yeah, maybe I overdid things with the dance career. But basically then this biofilm infection still I found out after I had my baby a year ago, still had not gone fully from my system. So I was thinking my rehab was really slow after the rod removal. It was like a 3.5 hour surgery. It's so much quicker, you know, than the putting the rods in. But I was really slow to get better. And I actually found I had to have an emergency C-section with my baby a year ago because of infection spreading and his heart rate raising. So I was like, I knew I was like still feeling ill and not right the whole time. And then I felt even worse after the C-section. And then I ended up with sepsis in like just in May this year. And they gave me an IV drip and antibiotics finally, because when they took the rods out, they wouldn't even give me oral antibiotics. They refused to accept I had a biofilm infection because it couldn't be proved, there was no biopsy. They literally told me, oh, they found some bacteria on the rods after they took them out, but they think, you know, they don't think it's anything to worry about. I finally got an IV drip with fluids and antibiotics like 2.5 years after they took the rods out. Um, so yeah, now I'm like doing even better than I was. I'm like finally doing loads of exercises to rehab my spine and try and even see if I can correct the curve a little bit. And I this is how I met Martha really, because her the somatics online were just so helpful to get my brain and you know my body flowing and connecting again because I it was so much harder than I thought. Like my nervous system was so scrambled, and because you're used to having rods holding you, when they're gone, it's like, oh, it's like there's you that's where the curve is, you that's where the rods were, and everything is just like, what is going on? So I got no help, no counseling, nothing, you know, and it's been really, you know, cathartic as well to hear everyone else's stories and know you're not alone. And I've sort of done like a bit of a rehab blog as well because I'm studying like herbal and natural health diploma. So I thought maybe if anyone does have their rods out, it might be nice to know things that can help the biofilm infection and maybe what things helped me rehab as well because I had to do a lot of work on the scar tissue because that was like another thing and the breathing restriction and yeah, I started a YouTube page and Facebook called Standing Up to Scoliosis. And yeah, so yeah, if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you so much. We can applaud by waving our hands if you feel like it. That's incredible. Your story. You've been through so much, and thank God your baby's healthy and you've been able to feel better since then. Well, I know that's a lot to take in, and now we're going to take in more. Next up, we have Sandra Vest, and this is Sandra Vest from New York State, and she has her own story to share with us now.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. So I'm Sandy or Sandra, and I am 70, and I live in upstate New York, near the Pennsylvania border. I'm a retired theatrical costume construction teacher for different theater companies over the years. And I also have a bridal gown alterations business. So I'm always at a sewing machine. Um, so I'm 70 now. My curvature was discovered in 1968. I was about 13 or 14 years old and in middle school. And it was discovered, my memory is by way of a chest x-ray for a cough that I had. The curvature was seen in the x-ray. So I went on through middle school and high school. I had the curvature checked, um, either once or twice a year out of town at a bigger hospital. And the curvature became worse as I was growing and turning into a teenager. But I was never put in a brace, either the kind of brace you wear at night, in your sleep, or the kind you could wear all day. I never had that. As a kid, I was grateful for that. I would have preferred not to go back to school in a brace. So I was relieved. I don't know why I never was treated. I was just watched. Um, but at any rate, when I graduated from high school, I had my final appointment at the clinic. The x-ray showed that my lumbar curve was 67 degrees, so it was quite severe. But I had stopped growing in height, and so the spine stopped moving. And the doctors then sent me off to go ahead to go to college and said I should be able to live with that degree of curvature. It was not real painful at that point. Um, and I had learned how to live with it and with how it looked. So I was happy. I went off to college. And in my second year of school, I grew another inch. So I was very tall already. I went from in college about 5'10" when I entered college. And in 2 years later, I was 6 feet tall. And so that extra inch or inch and a half that I shot up late in life, I believe activated and woke up my spine, and it began curving again. And I started having pain in my legs and in my lower back. And I was quite sure that I was diagnosing it correctly. I knew that I was in for some trouble and I needed to come home. So I left Miami where I was in college, came back up to New York. This would be 1975 at this point, and was scheduled for surgery for a fusion at that point, through the same clinic that had been seeing me all through high school. So I had a couple months in the summer right before the surgery, and to mentally prep for it. The pain began to get worse and worse. So I was making the right decision, I knew. But what was really frightening, I was 19, 20 years old, I guess, was the doctor was telling me that if I did not have the surgery, but if I wanted to have children, I should have them soon because I would be raising them from a wheelchair if I didn't have the surgery. The risk of paralysis was going to be high if I did have the surgery. So it was a tough decision as a 19-year-old to make, but I did. I decided to have it. And in August of that summer of 75, I was admitted to the hospital then for the surgery. And I remember spending a couple of days in traction in the hospital bed where some weights were wrapped around my underarms and my neck and hung off the top of the bed. And then some weights were wrapped around my ankles and hung off the bottom of the bed. The goal being to stretch me out and make my spine as flexible as possible before the surgery. So I recall that. This was all 50 years ago now, so some of the details are gone. But I had the surgery then a couple of days later, and I remember being woken up and asked if I could wiggle my toes, which happens in any surgery, I believe. But I remember being in my drugged up state really, really grateful that I knew I was wiggling my feet. So I knew that I had not been paralyzed by the surgery. The next couple of days were kind of a blur of morphine. I was put on what's called a striker bed. I believe they still exist. So the bed was very narrow, only as wide as your body, across your hips. You lay on the bed, and I remember being strapped to it in about 3 different places. And so that the goal was that you hold extremely still after the surgery so you don't move anything. The rods do not get jostled. If I needed to be turned over so that I could look down at a tray of food and eat, then another bed was strapped to me on my stomach. Turn your head and let a long, thin mattress be strapped to you from top to bottom. And then 2 nurses, one at each end with a crank, would turn the bed. They'd say 1, 2, 3, and spin the bed over, and then you'd be facing downward. And the mattress you were laying on then became unstrapped and leaned against the wall for the next time. And that's how I was flipped for a few days so that I could use my arms and feed myself from a tray under the bed. Very, very medieval. But that was okay. The pain was really awful, but I was awake and not in such a morphine state at that point, and I knew what was happening. And then the next day, after about 3 days of that, I was put in the body cast, a plaster body cast that I stayed in for a whole year. And having the cast put on, I will say to this day remains really the most frightening day of my life. It was quite scary to be moved off that striker bed and feeling very vulnerable with that fresh surgery and the rods. I remember that your body was hung almost like a hammock between 2 poles, and so that the doctors could then begin wrapping my torso in plaster all the way around. And they worked very quickly. I remember buckets of wet water and plaster and gauze, and they wrapped and wrapped and wrapped as quickly as they could from the top of my head, my face exposed, of course, and down to about the middle of my thighs. My arms were out, but lifted up high. And so it was almost like a long tube dress that started on the back of my head. So the cast was put on, and then I was immediately sent to X-ray so they could finally X-ray me after the first X-ray after the surgery. And it apparently looked like everything was in good shape. So I think I spent another day or 2 in the hospital in the cast, but not much. I was sent home pretty quickly. A hole was cut out in the abdomen, a rectangular shape, right over the stomach area, so that if I needed emergency surgery throughout the next year, that was an easy way to break the cast open. And that also gave the patient a little bit of breathing room. You could expand your stomach a little bit, your abdomen. So that would be end of August in 1975. I just turned 20 that summer. And a few days, maybe a week and a half after I came home in that cast, my parents and my younger sisters all had to leave the house in the morning and go off to school. My parents were educators, so everybody was on a school schedule. And I was home alone out in the country in a body cast. So I had to learn quickly while my parents were still at home how to navigate by myself. And remember, no internet back then, just a landline house phone and television. I could walk in the cast. I could use my arms out in front of me a little bit like alligator arms. So everything had to be kind of waist high or countertop high so that I could make my own lunch during the day and things like that. I remember learning that if I was barefoot in the house, I could use my feet to help pick up something that may have fallen on the floor. And I used one of those grabber tools on a pole. That was incredibly helpful. So even if something was on a shelf and was higher than I could reach with my arms, I could use the grabber to bring it down and get it to the floor where I could then use my foot to pick it up and reach behind myself and pick the item up, piece of paper or a book or something. It was fun. But you become creative, especially when you're alone. But I got through it, and it was a tough year, obviously, in many ways. I remember just thinking I'll never get out of this cast. I want it off so badly. But I also had a lot of lovely things happen that year too. Family support, community support. At that point, the year went on, and I remember it was more like January. The cast was then cut down a little bit as my healing happened. The cast was cut down right across here, like almost like a strapless dress. And that the removal of the parts that were around my head and behind my head that prevented me from turning my neck, having that section gone was amazing. It was freedom. I could turn my head, I could breathe and breathe better. I could do more. I could wash my own hair. So that was terrific. And it helped me to realize the end was near. I had a few more months to go. So now the year has gone by. It was August of 1976. I was 21 at that point, and went back to the hospital and had the cast cut off. And it was a real celebratory day. It was wonderful. I remember taking an outfit with me that I hadn't worn in a year because I reduced my clothing to one outfit or two versions of the same outfit. A pair of farmer jeans with buckles over the shoulders because that worked, and a couple of my dad's flannel shirts. I looked like a farmer in a body cast. There was no way, no way around it. But it worked. The clothing worked. But I was grateful to have something else to take with me, a new outfit to wear on the way home from the hospital. But as Sarah said, there was no counseling of any kind back then. You were on your own in terms of what your new body felt like, what your new life was going to be like, the fact that you still had scoliosis, but it was brought to a halt, but you still had it. Now you have metal in your back. None of that was talked about. And it was especially true on the day the body cast came off. I remember laying down on the bed, and a nurse or doctor cut the cast off down the sides, lifted the front of it off, and set that in the corner of the room. And I was able to really see it from across the room. And it was kind of a surreal, literally out of body experience to see that in that way. Then I sat up, and they removed the back, gave me a washing and a scrubbing, which felt wonderful. My skin was in great shape. Anyway, the cast came off, got a little bit of a bath. The person who did that work left the room. I'm sure I had an x-ray without the cast. And then I just remember my mom and I sitting in this room waiting to be told what to do next. And after 20 minutes of nobody coming in to talk to us, she said, "I guess we're going home." And that was the end of the experience. I probably had a follow-up x-ray 6 months later or a year later. I don't remember anymore. But literally just off you go. Have a good life. I was married the next year, and within the next decade, I had my 3 children, and I had no pain. I had birth pain, of course, birthing pain, but I had no pain from my back surgery at all with any of my pregnancies. I to this day think that's just a miracle. And I had large babies and I had hard labor, but none of it was because of the spinal issues. What I did live with, the consequences of this surgery, is something called flat back syndrome, where when you have the lumbar fused, you no longer have the ability to articulate your vertebrae. It's almost like wrapping, how would I say this? Attaching a broomstick to your back or something. There's no way to curve your lower back at all. It's stuck, it's frozen in that position. So I have that flat back syndrome. a more difficult consequence for me is the tilting forward that of your body, of your torso, that happens when you've had the surgery, the fusion, because without it, you're standing like this. As soon as those rods are put in and you can no longer move your back this way, those rods cause a person to lean forward like this. So that perpetual tilting forward has been difficult for me. I'm not a vain person at all, but it's hard to see that in a window as you're walking by. But I've flipped or altered my thinking over my lifetime with this. So instead of feeling resentful about those things, I often say to myself, oh, look what I can do because I had the surgery, not what I can't do because I had the surgery. But we're here to talk about revision surgery, and that means that I had to have my fusion revisited at one point. So in 1999, at that point, I was 44 years old. That would have been 23 years later. I began to have lower back pain. So I got some fresh x-rays, and fusion was not falling apart at all. It was still in very good shape. But the new doctor pointed out to me that people my age who had the fusion done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with the Harrington rods, the thinking used to be that if a couple of vertebrae were left unfused, even if they were part of the scoliosis, it would allow the patient some mobility, twisting, turning, hinging, whatever. And he said the point was that now, a couple decades later, we were all showing up with back pain because those vertebrae were just worn out from doing all the work. So I had a second fusion. So my surgery was not a revision to the first, it was an added on fusion. He separated those couple of vertebrae, and instead of having rods attached, he inserted metal rings and screws and bolts, which worked. Again, my surgeries worked. I consider myself such a success story that both surgeries took away the pain, and I never had pain from either of them again. So another thing I'm extremely grateful for. One issue I have developed in the last 10 years that is likely from the main fusion is neuropathy in my feet. My doctors have said it's likely from the fusion pressing down on a long nerve that runs down your leg and into your feet. I mostly manage it with creams, with warm socks, with attitude. I stopped saying, "Oh, my damn foot, why is it hurting?" And I changed my verbiage to, "Oh, my poor foot, what does it need today?" And I'm telling you, it helps. It works for me anyway. So the second surgery was nowhere near the issue the first fusion was. I remember wearing in 1999 some kind of brace for a few weeks around my abdomen to help stimulate the nerve regrowth around that new fusion. But boy, once I got through the healing of that a few months, I went back to work, and I have been healthy since. I'm alive and have a lovely home and life and family. One last thing I wanted to say. One of the things I've been able to do is a lot of yoga. I realized some years ago that this flexibility that I have now is all I'm ever going to have. I'll never gain more than this. So I wanted to hang on to that. So I take a lot of yoga classes, and they're lovely. I really enjoy what I can do with those classes. And then the final thing I want to say is that I decided just a few years ago an end of life decision. I decided I wanted to do a full body donation to the pathology lab at the hospital that did my major fusion. And they were unbelievably excited and grateful and said how much they badly need bodies. And I thought, if they can open me up and say, this is how we treated scoliosis in the 1900s, which makes me sound like a dinosaur. But I thought, why not? Let people if somebody can learn from that, excellent. So that's been my journey. I hope that was understandable, all of it. But I want to thank Martha for creating this chance to talk about this.
Well, thank you, Sandra. That was just wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing. This is my applause. Okay, so with that, we do have a third story to hear today. So now I'm going to introduce you to Gail Rossi, who's with us from New Mexico, and she has quite a story for us. So please, Gail, thank you for being here, and let us hear what you have to say.
Well, first, Gail Rossi. I'm 71. I turned 71 on Friday last week. My journey began when I was 11. I'd also like to preface my story by saying that no one is going to be exactly like anyone else, most especially me. My story is kind of unusual. I have had 8 spine surgeries. I am currently fused C2 from the base of my skull all the way down to my pelvis. My x-ray looks like the Eiffel Tower. I had been a very athletic child. I swam, I played tennis. I was always athletic, but I noticed when I was about 11 years old, I started falling off the balance beam in gym class, very embarrassing. I had some pain in typing class. I played piano. I was in excruciating pain with anything that left my arms slightly elevated in front of me. And I noticed that one shoulder blade was sticking out tremendously. In those days, when I was in elementary school, they didn't do the bending test. I never heard the word scoliosis, I don't think, until I was an adult. But my mother was in total denial. She just couldn't stand the fact that there could possibly be anything wrong with her beloved only daughter. And she would say, nonsense, stand up straight, it's your posture. So I went through my teenage years. I was swimming into the lane of the person next to me because the right side of my body was so much stronger. The muscles were overdeveloped. I had to get behind the ball to play tennis so I could use my wicked strong backhand. Things were off. I knew things were off. I was so self-conscious. I did not wear a bathing suit more than maybe twice in my entire teenage life, which is pretty sad. And I had zero support because in those days, like I said, I never even heard the word scoliosis at that point. So fast forward to the age of 19, when I was finally old enough to take myself to an orthopedic doctor who showed me my x-ray for the first time. At the time, my thoracic curve was 36 degrees. So not quite bad enough for him to talk surgery with me. But at the time they did some, and Sarah, I think it was Sandy used the word medieval, did some really torturous things. And I was given injections in my back of saline with the thought being it would produce scar tissue that would strengthen my spine. Guess what? Didn't happen. It was torture for nothing. And fast forward again, I got married at 26. And when I was 28 or 29, my husband was very supportive and I went to see an orthopedic surgeon. My scoliosis had gone from 36 degrees to 47 degrees, my thoracic curve. The lumbar curve was only at 18, really didn't bother me. But the thoracic curve, the apex of the curve felt like there was a burning hot poker in the middle of my back. I would come home from work and writhe across the floor crying. So we went to a surgeon and he recommended surgery. Only complications I had were most people see pink elephants and rainbows when they're on morphine. I saw a different atrocity in every window across from my hospital bed, which was in Philadelphia, where I grew up. And I had a paralytic ileus, which basically means my stomach went to sleep. I was projectile vomiting. I needed an NG tube in my nose down to my stomach for nourishment. But other than that, it was okay. After 2 weeks, I went home. The first year was tough. Unlike Sandy, I was not in a plaster cast. I was in a plastic body jacket. Like her, it started under my arms and extended to my hips, and I had to wear it 23 hours a day. I could take it off to shower. After a very difficult year, I could walk a little further. It wasn't incremental in terms of days. It wasn't, I got better every day. It was more of weeks. Maybe week 4, I started feeling like, yeah, this has got an end in sight, and I was doing okay. After 2 years, I was doing high impact aerobic dancing. I was back to playing tennis. I was swimming. I was hiking. I was traveling. I was doing all my Gail things. 38 great years I had from that surgery. So now I'm in my mid-60s. I never had that pain again at the apex of the curve after that surgery. I woke up without that pain. The only pain I ever experienced was when I got very fatigued. I could feel my back. It was a little metal monsterish at that point. But I had a great 38 years after the first surgery. Then I started to develop some pain again, and I felt wobbly. I called my walk the drunken penguin walk. I felt like my feet weren't exactly in control. My legs weren't doing exactly what I wanted them to do. Time to see an orthopedic surgeon again. I guess 65-ish at this point. And what Sandy was trying to remember is called adjacent segment disease, or ASD. So above and below the fusions, as we age with gravity and just the natural course of the bones getting thinner, we tend to compress exponentially. And that's what was happening to me. So he said, the only thing that's going to help you is more surgery. I never thought I'd have to have that kind of spine surgery again. It took me a long time to come to terms with it, but I took myself to a surgeon. I now live in the mountains east of Albuquerque in Santa Fe County. And I went to a doctor at University of New Mexico who said, your case is so severe, I would strongly recommend going back to Philadelphia. Of course, my surgeon had retired, or to California, which is the other coast I'd lived on for 13 years. I had friends in California. One lived very close to a good hospital, a good doctor. I vetted a few doctors. I decided on one, and off I went, leaving my cat and my husband behind. I went to California and had surgery number 2 with great expectations, because surgery number 1 was such a boon to my life. And I thought, well, now they have so much more technology. Of course, I didn't consider my bones are thinner. I'm now in my mid-60s. I'm not 29 anymore. I had the surgery. Shortly thereafter, I was back in New Mexico, and it felt like my head was entering a room before the rest of my body. Something was not right. Things were moving and shifting, and it wasn't doable. I'd have to lean on my elbows and put my head in my hands to sit. So I went back, I contacted the doctor, and he said, you need a revision, and we'll schedule that for a few months into the future. We'll let you mend from this surgery first, heal a little bit. As luck would have it, my husband and I were on the freeway coming back from an eye doctor appointment, and we were rear-ended. It broke 2 more vertebrae. I think 2 had already broken. So I had 4 broken vertebrae now, and it became an emergency situation. Now we're in the throes of COVID. It was 2021. I did have the surgery, and it seemed to go okay. I was in the hospital another 2 weeks. All of my hospital stays were 2 weeks. I went to a rehab facility, and I was there for a week, where they booted me out saying, you're doing too well, we can't keep you anymore. But after a week, I went back to my friend's house. This is in San Diego, and everything was okay. I was getting ready to go back home. And after another week at her house, I went to see my surgeon, and I was getting these horrible bouts of nausea, and I thought it's from not eating. So my girlfriend ordered food. She went to pick it up. We were at her condo, and as soon as she walked out the door, I got violently ill. I was vomiting into the toilet with my newly fused back, and my teeth were chattering like jackhammers. I had a raging fever. I somehow got myself up the stairs and into bed and under the covers. By the time my friend got home and took my temperature, it was nearly 104. I was delirious. She contacted my doctor and he said, you get her to the ER. Again, because of the crowded hospital situations during COVID, I was put in a temporary ward with sort of canvas walls between each bed. Suddenly, I heard a code blue over the loudspeaker. I thought, oh, maybe that's me. It was. And 5 people, women, were working over me, and I could hear their voices come and go. They were fading in and out, fading in and out. And I would go unconscious when I tried to stay with them. They kept saying, Gail, stay with us. Can you hear us? Talk to us. Long story short, I was diagnosed with sepsis, which is, like Sarah experienced, an incredibly horrible infection, just horrible infection in my spine. It takes one little bacterium to infiltrate the bloodstream, and it happens real fast. So back I go. They had to do 3 more surgeries that week to clean out the gross infection. In the hospital, another 2 weeks, and then 6 weeks in a nursing home on IV antibiotics. So that's 3 more surgeries. Then another, because they had to remove all the biologic material, which means the bone graft and whatever else of an organic nature they had put into the new cage that I had instead of the Harrington rod. So it all had to be redone again. So I think that's 8 surgeries. Oh, they had to go in through the front of my neck initially, and then a few days later through the back. It left me very debilitated, but alive. Thankful for that. I was on oral antibiotics for the next 2 years. I went home finally. Actually, it's been 2 years since I had another surgery. They had to fuse my lumbar spine. They wanted to wait again for several months to let me heal from all that had happened previously. And then July of 2023, I had my lumbar spine fused. So all in all, quite debilitating. My arms became palsied. For a while, it felt like there was sulfuric acid running through my chest and my arms. That thankfully went away. But now I walk with a cane. I just graduated. I got a rollator today. But I went to Italy for a month a year ago, and I don't say it to be braggadocious, but it was no simple feat for me. My husband and friends would go sightseeing. I would make my own fun. I'd sit in a park with a nice scenery. I would try to communicate with people. I was in Italy. I had to tell myself, you might not be able to walk on the cobblestones or up and down the stairs. That was brutal. But you're in Italy for a month, staying at a villa. Life isn't too bad. I had 2 hunky firemen carry me up the steps one time. So I still managed to have fun. The sepsis has never returned. My Harrington rod initially was T4 through T12. As I said, now I'm fused C2 to sacrum. It's hard to be debilitated, but you know what? I still have a sense of humor. I remember the last surgery saying to the surgeon, so I'm going to wake up 5'9", right? And unlike Sandy, my tallest was 5'1", and then I was down to 4'8". Now I'm back up to an incredibly tall 4'10". But I'm still here. My mission in life, since I can't do much physically, has become to help a friend I met through one of the scoliosis support group sites who lives in Morocco. His name is Nasser. He's 25 and has one of the most horrifying cases of scoliosis I've ever seen. He's having trouble breathing. He's having trouble sleeping. He's having trouble walking. I wrote a book in the past. It took me a couple of years to complete a book. It's not long. It's infused with humor, but it's also kind of a challenging story to read. It's available on Amazon. It's called Tilted Temple, My Life with Scoliosis. I'm really proud of it. Now I'm retired. Still trying to travel, but it's pretty challenging. Life be like that. I saw my wonderful surgeon. I was complaining to him. I have my pity parties. I try not to make them too long or too frequent. But I remember saying to him, I feel so broken. And he said, you know what? If you hadn't had the surgery, you'd be coming to see me in a wheelchair. So I thought, he's right. Man, I survived sepsis. I survived 8 surgeries. I'm still here and sort of upright. So I too have neuropathy in my feet. They're starting in my hands. There are challenges. There just are. Life isn't always fair, but I still consider myself really fortunate. I have a nice home. I have 2 new beloved kittens who drive me crazy. I have my husband, and thank God for friends, because they gave me support like nothing else. My favorite expression is, I have a rotten spine, but fabulous friends. So keep your friends close, keep a sense of humor. Life goes on. We do the best we can with whatever hand we're dealt. And I'm happy to be here with all of you. I wish this group had existed when I was 12, or at least when I was 30. And thank you all for letting me share. As Sarah said, it's very cathartic to be able to tell this story after being like in the closet as a teenager with 0 support. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. What a challenging journey you have gone through. And I think that, like you said at the beginning, each of us has an individual, unique journey. We can't really ever know what the other person goes through. We each have a unique curve, a unique surgery, a unique healing experience, but we all have in common the understanding that it takes incredible amount of strength and resilience, once again, to stick with the program, get through it, and then still have a sense of humor and find ways to enjoy movement, enjoy life. So thank you so much for sharing your incredible story. So then Helena asked us, you, Sarah, also about whether or not your team had concerns about the scoliosis progressing after the removal of the hardware.
They said that the worst case scenario is it could get about 10 degrees bigger, but it's different, yeah, with each person. A lot of
Of
them, it's
course.
sort of the same, really, because it's fused, the bones are fused, so they don't really need the rods long term necessarily. And then the surgeon basically told me that they used to always take the rods out when they first started ever doing spinal fusion surgery, because they were worried of the long-term effects of having like the metals they used at the time might have been toxic as well. And but then they realized, yeah, that people were okay leaving metal in when they started using titanium sort of alloys or something. So then they just kept them in because they thought it's more risky to take them out. But I don't really know if there are that many, like there's not a lot of research to go on when I tried to research it on people who've had them out like long term. So it was quite scary trying to make that decision. Do I take them out or not? So I had to just go on speaking to other people who'd had them out, and they all gave me positive experiences. So I was like, well, I've just got to trust what other people have gone through. I don't know.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that actually, first of all, is so interesting that there are places in the world and times in the time of the surgery since the 60s where it has been common to remove the hardware because we are left with the fusion. And that's why I always refer to this as fusioneers. We are fusioneers. We're not just hardware people, because the hardware may or may not still be there. Even if you get the hardware removed, you're still left with a fused and stiff spine. And that is really where a lot of the impact of the dysfunction comes from, right? We're meant to have a very flexible spine. So the fact, though, that the hardware can be the carrier of the bacteria, that's how I almost always hear about infections, is has to do with either an infection somewhere else in the body, or where the hardware gets put in, there's bacteria attached to it, which is what it sounds like happened with Gail's revision surgery. Okay, so we have another question here. Thanks, Sarah. Sandra, what levels were your first fusion?
Everything is fused except the cervical vertebrae. So all thoracic, all lumbar. So I don't know all the numbers, but it's everything except my upper shoulders and neck. Yeah.
But then before you had the revision surgery,
Yes, the bottom two vertebrae were not fused in the first fusion, exactly, but now they are.
Go
I've
ahead.
never, can I ask, I've never understood how rods could be removed because mine, when they were put in and they cranked the spine to the level they wanted it, then I had bone chips taken off my hips and laid all around the rod up and down. And that's why I was in the cast all year so that bone could grow together. I don't know how you would get a rod out of that.
What I understand is that they're fusing the bone. They're not fusing the rod to the bone, right? It
Oh,
depends on
right.
the surgery itself because now there's many much more complex cages, rods, and hooks. With the original Harrington rod, it was basically one long rod, a hook at the
Right.
top, and a hook at the bottom, and then
Yeah.
possibly a second rod or a rod made out of hooks on the other side that were attached to the spine, but not fused with the bone to the spine. So that's why they could remove those pieces and the fusion's still there. There is always a risk that there's calcification and bone growing around the hardware over the years for sure. The
Right.
new Cotrel-Dubousset, or versions of this where they create cages and little boxes around each vertebra, much more hardware, much more difficult to remove, much more embedded in the bone. That's how I understand it. So that is why it is possible in some cases and almost impossible in other cases. Okay, yeah, it is interesting. There's just so many details to this. And once again, everybody's situation is very unique. So
Yes.
with that in mind, we have, once again, Gail, what is your daily life as far as walking and being on your feet?
That's a very good, interesting question. My neck is by far the worst part of this for me. I cannot turn my head. I can no longer drive, which is the number one worst thing for me. I just graduated from a cane after 4 years to a rollator walker. Not making me happy, but you know what? We do what we have to do. Makes me feel 100 years old. It takes me an hour to shower. Washing my hair because of the palsy in my upper arms, it's real hard for me to reach the top of my head. It takes me an hour to get dressed, putting things over my head, buttoning things, and I can't look down. I have two kittens. I can't tell which one's rubbing against my ankles. I can't look in my purse. I do things by feel. It's almost sometimes like being blind. To excuse me for being disgusting, but it's hard for me to wipe my ass. But there are tools for most things. I have learned to deal with things I never could have imagined myself doing. And, life goes on.
Like, what about going out and going like to Costco and cooking and stuff like that?
I can cook.
Okay.
Doing dishes is a little different, but it is what it is. I can't walk more than, with the cane, it was about 10 steps without stopping to rest. I feel like I'm going to capsize, like my right leg is going to just collapse under me. With the rollator, it's more like triple that. I can walk maybe 30 steps without having to stop and rest. So I stop and rest. I have my groceries delivered. My husband is 77 and has 6 herniated discs. So between the two of us, we're pretty limited. Like Sandy, I donated my body. And I thought, when they cremate me at the end, they can make a really cool robot out of all that metal.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
And there is the sense of humor. Okay. Thanks, Meg. Thanks for the question. Okay, so we also have Margaret asking, has anyone come across research that points to the biofilm or other infections, and is there a way to avoid them? or should we fusioneers always get antibiotics even after routine dental work, that sort of things? Is there any recommendation that you've come across through your sepsis experiences or infection experiences?
I don't know personally. I don't know if Sarah, you do. I don't know of any way to exactly prevent it. I'm sure hospitals do their best to keep things sanitary and clean and disinfected. One bacterium, one bacterium can cause sepsis. It can go everywhere. It can go into the valves in the heart muscle. I don't know that there's any way to prevent it. I was not given prophylactic antibiotics. I don't know if, I guess you weren't either, Sarah. But I will say, in regard to your tooth removal, Sarah, I need a tooth extracted now. And because I'm on Prolia for my bones and I can't stop taking it, we risk osteonecrosis. The jawbone can die, and bones in our spine can lose cells, and we can't afford to lose any of those cells. So I'm having a challenge there. I need a knee replaced, open to infection anytime you get a joint replaced. So I have dilemmas now post sepsis that I don't know if people normally would have those challenges. But I haven't seen research to determine what causes it and how to prevent it.
So at this point, I guess I'm just going to wind this up by thanking everyone so much for being with us today. And also stay tuned for another forum that we'll put together for the spring. And so we'll be advertising that in the Twisted Outreach Project newsletter. So if you're not part of that newsletter, please sign up for that. And thank you again, Gail, Sarah, and Sandra.
Thank you all. Bye.
Okay,
Bye,
bye
all.
everybody for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.